Tonight we talk about who will be needed to build and run these billion-dollar nuclear submarines. Will employers be able to sponsor anyone for PR earning over $85,000? Visa processing time updates, why teaching is such a high demand occupation, and are we being misled over visa backlogs? Hi, I'm Karl Konrad and welcome to our weekly edition of Australian Immigration News, proudly brought to you by Australian Immigration Law Services here in Sydney. If you're looking for the latest information about immigration law changes, policy updates and media discussions, then you've found the right channel. This week it was hard to escape the news about Australia planning to spend nearly $400 billion over the next 30 years on nuclear submarines and associated support facilities. And how is this relevant to migration, you ask? Well, we're going to need a whole lot of skilled people. In fact, with skills that Australians don't even have yet to build and run these tin cans.
Hey, we've got a problem here.
Houston, say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem.
And of course, Australian universities have been quick off the mark to step in and talk of courses to help build the skill base in nuclear technology. According to the article in The Australian, there are only 2 universities in Australia that offer teaching and research in nuclear fields. It is estimated that each nuclear submarine would require 215 highly trained PhD graduates. The article points out that it's not just nuclear physics skills required, but also a range of capabilities to keep these things afloat. Mechanical, electrical and nuclear engineering to start with, and then there's all the technicians in various fields and the welders who are going to stick them all together. So if you're technically or trade-minded, you know what courses to look for to study here in Australia to help fill these future skills gaps. On Friday, Australia's Productivity Commission released a 1,000-page report on how Australia must reform key areas of the economy or face the consequences. 7 News outlined what Australia is up against.
It shows annual productivity growth over the last 10 years was just 1.1%. That's the worst it's been in 60 years. It's now sitting at 22% lower than the United States, which is considered the yardstick. The report predicts that if productivity stays stuck at that level, future incomes will be 40% lower and the working week 5% longer. So for those on a 40-hour week, they'll have to do an extra 2 hours just to get the work done. But Jim Chalmers says if productivity had kept pace with the 60-year average, national income would have been $4,600 higher per person in 2020.
The report recommends that employers be allowed to sponsor any employee for permanent residency, no matter what the occupation, as long as they are being paid at least $85,000. For a temporary residency sponsorship, the minimum salary was recommended at $70,000. It recommends shifting the employment visa scheme from a list-based restrictions to instead set a minimum pay threshold that rises with age. There also could be longer temporary visa durations, but with tougher pathways to permanent residency and changes that would allow employer-sponsored workers to switch employers more easily, allowing for temporary unemployment. So in the future, we can expect the government is examining the possibility of doing away with the complicated occupation lists and the farcical labour market testing requirements that are required today. There are other organisations though that are calling to keep the occupation list, so this decision could fall either way at the moment. The APC report also outlined the government should adopt a new skilled carer visa with a pathway for permanent residency to help fill the gap of aged care workers in aged care centres. It is proposed that visa holders could move to new employers within the industry with a condition they remain employed for at least 4 years before qualifying for permanent residency. The good news this week for those planning to migrate from overseas and relocate to New South Wales, according to The Australian, 37,914 people have moved out to make space for you. The article reported that New South Wales had the greatest number of people leave towards the end of last year. The sad part is that it will probably not have a large impact on commuting times or reduce the high rate of rental prices, but hey, some extra space is better than none. Now let's take a look at any improvements in the processing times over the last month compared to the figures we reported on at the end of January. For the 189 visa it was 3 months then and now is 3 months. For the 190 visa it was 15 months and now is 36 months. For the 491 visa it was 30 months and is still at 30 months. For the 489 visa 48 months and now 42, which is not really impressive since the 489 visa closed in November of 2019. For the 887 visa it was 27 months and it is still at 27 months. For the 476 visa it was 41 months and is still at 41 months. Unfortunately, for some reason not much is happening for these subclasses. For the Fiancé 300 visa we did not report on it in last edition, but for now it is 35 months. For the 309 visa it was 36 months, now down to 30 months, and for the 820 partner visa it was 38 months and now down to an incredible 37 months. So the 190 visa processing performance is disgraceful, along with all the others which still have more than 2 years of processing. Slight improvements for the 309, 820 and 489 visas, but still nothing to be proud of. Overall, still a disgraceful situation, and as we have said before, if you want more people to choose Australia as a destination to migrate to, Claire O'Neill, you are going to have to do better than this. Don't forget, it is soon coming to 12 months since the Labor government has taken over this processing mess, but still we are not seeing much improvement in these figures. And speaking of figures, it is now time to take a look at the number of invitations that were allocated to the states and territories and the actual nominations handed out. This is taken from a recent Freedom of Information request. Here you have the allocated quotas broken down to each state and territory and the actual nominations approved till the end of February this year. Now, given that quite a number of new invitations have been issued in December and January, there is still a disturbing trend to be seen. For example, what on earth is Queensland waiting for, with just over a third of their quota only issued and nearly 3/4 of the way through the financial year? The same goes for WA, the ACT and Victoria, they're just over half. Now for the 491 figures. South Australia is the standout here, doing well to spread out their 491 quotas, but Queensland, WA, Victoria and the ACT are taking a very half-hearted approach. But what on earth is New South Wales doing? What are they waiting for? Less than 25% of allocations released? And finally, we have the results from another FOI request for the 489, 491, 887, 190 and 189 visas. The data demonstrates the number of visa applications granted up until the 31st of January this year from July last year, and also the number of applications that are still yet to be processed during the same time period. Looking at the table for those granted first, you can see the huge jump that took place after the Jobs and Skills Summit last year for the 190 visa in particular. The figures jumped from 1,607 at the end of October to 5,121 at the end of November. The 189 visa also had a significant improvement for the same period, from 1,087 to 1,985. Unfortunately, the 491 visa has been neglected with not much improvement at all. But fortunately for the long-suffering 887 applicants, we have seen a significant rise to about double the pace. However, when you look at the figures for applications still to be processed, the government is just treading water. You can see from nearly all the data here, not much has changed at all. At the end of October 2022, the 189 visa had 27,980 applications to be processed, and by the end of January this year, there was 36,221. How the government can justify that 3-month processing figure seems to defy logic. In fact, as you can see in the comment sections of our videos, people are waiting much more than 3 months for their processing. For the 491 visa, it is pretty much the same story. 27,468 at the end of October, and at the end of January, 29,659. Overall then, these figures are bitterly disappointing, and we feel all the hype of getting rid of the backlog has been somewhat a deceptive move when it comes to the skilled visas. Yes, lots of tourist students and working holiday makers have poured into the country, but as far as getting a benefit from those who are going to help us with the skills shortages, not much difference at all. In fact, maybe even worse. Well, the immigration minister must have predicted my focus on processing numbers this week. On Thursday, Andrew Giles released a statement on his website with that charming smiling face saying, "The government has halved the backlog of 887 visas, which provide permanent residency to people who have lived and worked in regional Australia by streamlining and investing $36 million in visa processing." This government is turning the page on a decade of neglect, with February seeing the largest number of 887 visas ever granted in a single month, possibly because of an additional 582 staff working on visa processing right now. Well, that may be true since we only have the figures till the end of January. However, they just cannot keep spinning that same old statement. We can't fix a decade of failure overnight, but we're getting on with the job from day one to get visa applications out of the in-tray and workers into our regions. Well, let's see what the processing times are in another month, and we'll come back to this story. Regular viewers will remember my recommendation about choosing teaching courses as a great pathway for migration to Australia. This week on the Today Show, they outline perfectly the reasons why teaching will remain a high-demand occupation for some time to come.
3 out of 4 schools struggle with teacher shortages. 1 in 4 teachers are regularly teaching classes outside of their area of training. 7 in 10 teachers describe their workloads as unmanageable. And almost half of Australian teachers are considering quitting their jobs in the next 12 months.
And besides teaching, you may want to consider a Certificate 3 in Aged Care Personal Support. The Sydney Morning Herald highlighted the prospect of being short 25,000 aged care workers in the near future. Of course, the natural follow-up to such an issue was the paper's weekly editorial, calling on the immediate overhaul needed of the skilled migration system. However, no word on exactly how this is going to be achieved. It's on its way though, so stay tuned. And a curious piece of information was found in a recent FOI request on how student visas are processed. Did you know that if you are suspected of providing false documents or lying on your application, or have been subject to a public interest criteria called 4020, then a secret file is established about you, so you can be monitored in the years to come. Whether you withdrew the application before it was refused, or in fact it was refused, or even was waived due to special consideration requirements, they will be watching you for a very long time in the future. We'll leave a link to that FOI document in the description of this video. Well, that's another week over in the world of Australian immigration news. If it's moving and shaking and sounds related to migration, we will shine a light on it for you. If you haven't already, don't forget to support us by hitting that like icon. If you need help, we are always here, so just book a time to chat to us over Zoom, Skype, or the telephone. As always, take care out there, and I'll see you next time. So bye for now.